WSI, in association with Moxie Media, presents Hydrogen Sulfide Safety for the Oil, Gas, and Petrochemical Industries. Anyone who has worked in the oil field or the petrochemical industry, even for a short time, is aware that there are many potential hazards present on exploration, production, and refining facilities. Safety-conscious workers find that many of these hazards are easily detected. Once a hazard is recognized, it is usually a simple matter to take the precautions necessary to protect yourself. However, there is a hazard found on some locations that is not easily recognized: hydrogen sulfide. Over the years, hydrogen sulfide has killed hundreds of workers in the oil field and petrochemical industries. Many of its victims were completely unaware that a deadly concentration of the gas was present, since it is invisible and deadens the sense of smell at high concentrations. Unfortunately, many other victims were aware hydrogen sulfide was present and simply failed to take the appropriate precautions. Our objective in this video is to inform you how to recognize when hydrogen sulfide is present in your work area and to describe the precautions necessary to work with hydrogen sulfide safely. Moxie Media presents this information to help fulfill the training requirements of API Recommended Practice 49, ANSI Z 390.1, and other regulatory standards. All personnel, including employees, service company hands, and contractors working in an area where concentrations of hydrogen sulfide or sulfur dioxide may reach or exceed OSHA permissible exposure limits, shall be provided with training prior to beginning the work assignment. Companies are responsible for the training of their own employees by a qualified hydrogen sulfide safety instructor. Dates, instructors, attendees, and subjects for all personnel training sessions should be documented and appropriate records retained by the employer for a minimum of 1 year. Hydrogen sulfide is a deadly gas which is made up of 1 atom of sulfur and 2 atoms of hydrogen. It has many names, and you may hear it referred to by scientific names such as H2S, disulfur hydride, sulfur hydride, dihydrogen monosulfide, dihydrogen sulfide, sulfuretted hydrogen, and hydrosulfuric acid. You may also hear it referred to by common names such as sour gas, sewer gas, swamp gas, rotten egg gas, and stink damp. In industrial settings, the name most commonly used is H2S. H2S is formed when bacteria break down the sulfur-rich proteins found in dead plants and animals. Although this can happen regardless of whether or not oxygen is present, the bacteria tend to produce more H2S in stagnant, low-oxygen environments such as swamps and septic tanks. Since oil and gas are also created from organic materials trapped in sediment, H2S is often found in association with hydrocarbon-bearing formations. When H2S is found in a formation, it is usually created simultaneously with the oil and gas. However, it is possible for the H2S to be created at a later date by chemicals or bacteria introduced into the formation during production operations, such as acidizing or water flooding. When this process starts, a well will usually develop slowly increasing concentrations of H2S over its production life. In order to work safely around H2S, you must be aware of its properties and characteristics. Hydrogen sulfide has a combination of properties and characteristics that make it a particularly difficult chemical to deal with. Hydrogen sulfide is an extremely toxic gas, and it can cause a variety of health problems depending upon the concentration and duration of exposure. When presenting information on the toxicity of gases, the unit of measure most commonly used is part per million, which is abbreviated as ppm. Each part per million is 1/1,000,000th of the volume in question. A part per million is a very small unit. In fact, it takes 10,000 parts per million to equal 1% by volume. Concentrations of H2S above 10 parts per million, or 0.001% by volume, are considered unhealthy. The American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists has determined that it is safe to be exposed to a maximum average concentration of 10 parts per million during a 40-hour work week. This concentration is known as the threshold limit value, time-weighted average. Higher concentrations or longer durations of exposure are potentially harmful. Short-term exposures to concentrations between 10 and 100 parts per million can cause mild eye and respiratory tract irritation, headaches, and nausea. Long-term exposures to concentrations in this range can cause damage to the eyes, including ulcerated corneas. In some cases, exposures in this range may also cause sleep disturbances and loss of appetite, a condition known as anorexia. Short-term exposure to concentrations between 100 parts per million and 400 parts per million can cause serious eye and respiratory tract irritation, headaches, nausea, disorientation, and gastrointestinal disturbances. In addition to these problems, long-term exposure to concentrations in this range can cause pulmonary edema, which is also known as chemical pneumonia. Chemical pneumonia is a very serious condition that is potentially fatal if left untreated. Short-term exposure to concentrations above 500 parts per million can result in loss of consciousness due to respiratory arrest. H2S causes respiratory arrest by disrupting the signals sent by the nerves in the brain that control breathing. Between 500 parts per million and 700 parts per million, respiratory arrest can take minutes or hours to develop. However, at concentrations over 700 parts per million, respiratory arrest can result from just one breath. If the victim is not rescued and resuscitated within 3 to 6 minutes, permanent brain damage or death is likely to result. Under certain circumstances, individuals can experience the signs and symptoms of hydrogen sulfide exposure at concentrations lower than those presented here. Factors that might make an individual more susceptible to hydrogen sulfide include previous exposure to hydrogen sulfide, use of alcohol, drugs, and certain prescription medications, and health problems involving the respiratory, circulatory, or nervous systems, and personal biochemistry. Because medications and health problems can result in sensitivity to hydrogen sulfide, it is important to follow your company's guidelines concerning the medical evaluation of personnel assigned to work in areas that might contain hydrogen sulfide. Another dangerous property of H2S is its very poor warning characteristics. H2S doesn't usually give any visual warning of its presence, since it is a colorless gas. At low concentrations, H2S has an offensive, pungent odor, similar to rotten eggs. You may recognize the smell as something you have encountered before, because there can be as much as 14 parts per million H2S in human intestinal gas. At slightly higher concentrations, H2S may have a sweet or metallic odor. At concentrations above 100 parts per million concentrations, H2S deadens the olfactory nerves and has no odor at all. This is why instrumentation must be used to detect H2S instead of the sense of smell. H2S is also dangerous because it is very flammable, and high concentrations can result in explosive atmospheres. The minimum concentration that will burn is 4.3%, or 43,000 parts per million. The maximum concentration that will burn is 46%, or 460,000 parts per million. The temperature that will cause the gas to spontaneously ignite is 518 degrees Fahrenheit. When H2S burns, it burns with a blue flame and forms sulfur dioxide, a toxic and extremely irritating gas. Unlike H2S, sulfur dioxide has excellent warning properties. It smells like burnt matches and is intensely irritating at low concentrations, and it never deadens your sense of smell. Another reason H2S is particularly dangerous is that it is 19% heavier than air when compared to air at the same temperature. This can cause H2S to settle and accumulate in low-lying areas. This is especially likely to occur during periods of calm, cool, foggy weather. The fact that hydrogen sulfide is corrosive to metals such as iron, copper, and silver also presents a challenge. Since the steel in drilling, production, and refining equipment is primarily comprised of iron, corrosion can cause significant operational and safety problems. H2S reacting with steel may form iron sulfide or iron pyrite scale. When exposed to acid, both these scales have the potential to break down and release relatively large volumes of H2S. An additional hazard posed by iron sulfide is that when exposed to air, it may spontaneously ignite, releasing sulfur dioxide as it burns. As H2S reacts to form these scales, atomic hydrogen is released, which may penetrate the steel and cause sulfide stress cracking. Once inside, the atomic hydrogen diffuses to trap sites, where it causes a local increase in stress in the metal lattice. The stress ultimately leads to a brittle fracture of the material. This type of cracking usually occurs rapidly without warning and can result in catastrophic equipment failure. Using special alloys and chemical treatments can help control the corrosion problems associated with H2S. Now that you know the properties and characteristics of H2S, you need to know how to protect yourself from it. H2S occurs in a variety of settings within the upstream and downstream phases of the petrochemical industry. However, the basic precautions necessary to work safely around H2S are the same, regardless of where it is encountered. Safely working around H2S requires 6 action steps: a contingency plan, engineering controls, personal protective equipment, gas detection equipment, safe work practices, and a rescue plan. A hydrogen sulfide contingency plan is a document that consists of a systematic analysis of the hazards associated with an operation and the methods required to reduce the hazards to an acceptable level. A contingency plan describes the engineering controls, personal protective equipment, work practices, and emergency response procedures necessary to work safely. If you are expected to work on an H2S location, you must attend a site-specific orientation designed to familiarize you and your co-workers with the contingency plan that is in effect. One of the most important points found in the contingency plan is a discussion of how workers should respond when an unexpected release of H2S is detected. These may differ radically from location to location and may include such emergency response procedures as well control, blowout ignition, evacuation plans, and offshore rig deboarding procedures. The contingency plan must identify what essential and non-essential workers do at various alarm points on the gas detection system. Essential personnel are workers who must remain in operational areas to help control the emergency situation. For a low-concentration alarm, essential personnel locate a self-contained breathing apparatus, or SCBA, and move to their duty station. The SCBA does not have to be donned. For a high-concentration alarm, essential personnel must protect themselves by remaining calm and not panicking. Hold your breath. Immediately don an SCBA, ensuring its proper operation. Help any other persons in distress, and then perform your designated emergency responsibilities. Non-essential personnel respond to alarms in the same manner as essential personnel, except that non-essential personnel report to the designated upwind safe briefing area and await further instructions. SCBAs do not have to be donned for low alarms. Engineering controls are features incorporated into equipment or systems to reduce or eliminate hazards. Containment is one of the primary engineering controls used to protect personnel from exposure to H2S. This technique involves preventing the gas from being present in the breathing zone of workers by containing it within a closed piping system. Ventilation is another engineering control that is used to protect workers. With even a light breeze blowing, natural ventilation can greatly reduce the concentrations of toxic gas in the work environment. Where small volumes of gas may be released, fans are often effective at reducing atmospheric concentrations to safe levels. Because H2S tends to move with the wind, it is very important to remember to stay upwind of any potential points of release when working without respiratory protection. Often engineering controls cannot be used because they are not economically or technologically feasible. Personal protective equipment is frequently used when engineering controls are not a viable option. The personal protective equipment most frequently associated with H2S operations is the self-contained breathing apparatus, or SCBA. Respiratory protection is necessary to protect personnel in work environments where more than 10 parts per million hydrogen sulfide is present. Because of the poor warning characteristics, the only form of respiratory protection that is acceptable when hydrogen sulfide is present is the self-contained breathing apparatus. An SCBA is a respirator that incorporates an air cylinder worn on the user's body. This may or may not be the primary air supply. The air used in SCBAs must be highly purified breathing air, which is compressed gas association grade D or better. Three main types of SCBAs used in areas where H2S may be present are the escape unit, the hose line work unit, also known as a Type C unit, and the work rescue unit. The escape unit is a compact, lightweight SCBA provided to workers who regularly work in areas where H2S leaks might occur. These units are donned when the worker becomes aware of the potential for dangerous concentrations of H2S and decides to leave the area. Although cylinder capacities vary, the most common type of escape unit is equipped with a cylinder that provides 5 minutes of breathing time. Because of the small amount of breathing time available, these units have only one acceptable use: escape. You should never attempt to work or perform a rescue while wearing an escape unit. The hose line work unit is another type of SCBA provided to workers who must work for prolonged periods of time in areas where hydrogen sulfide is present. The distinguishing feature of these respirators is that they allow the wearer to access 2 air supplies. The primary air supply is delivered by hose line from a cascade of high-capacity breathing air cylinders or a remote breathing air compressor. The secondary air supply is contained in a cylinder worn on the respirator user's body. If the secondary air supply has a nominal duration less than 15 minutes, the respirator becomes an escape unit when the wearer is breathing from the cylinder worn on the body. The 30-minute work rescue unit is an SCBA provided to workers who must perform rescues or work in areas where the attachment to a remote air supply is not possible. A person wearing a 30-minute work rescue SCBA is unlikely to actually be able to work for 30 minutes because the nominal time is based on ideal conditions. A typical person will only be able to breathe off of a 30-minute work rescue SCBA for a little over 20 minutes. A low air alarm sounds on these units at 25% of cylinder capacity. When this happens, the respirator wearer must leave the hazardous area immediately. If you are expected to wear an SCBA, OSHA, API, and other international regulatory standards require that your employer assure that you are capable of wearing it safely. You must be medically evaluated, fit tested, and trained before you are allowed to wear a respirator in a potentially hazardous atmosphere. You must become thoroughly familiar with the inspection, donning, and emergency procedures for each model of SCBA you are expected to use. It is essential that employees hold periodic drills utilizing breathing equipment. These drills should be initiated by actuating the hydrogen sulfide alarm, whereupon all personnel should don the appropriate breathing equipment, proceed to assign protection areas in accordance with the emergency procedures, and await instructions. Essential workers should then perform a short period of routine work in the breathing equipment. After the drill, SCBA cylinders shall be refilled, inspected, and made ready for immediate use under emergency conditions. Because relatively low concentrations of H2S quickly deaden the sense of smell, portable gas detection equipment is often necessary to determine when SCBAs are necessary. Three types of gas detection equipment are commonly used to detect hydrogen sulfide: lead acetate tapes, colorimetric tubes, and electronic detectors. Lead acetate tapes reveal the presence of hydrogen sulfide by the indicator window changing from white to brown. Since these units do not have alarms, the indicator window must be checked frequently when approaching areas where hydrogen sulfide might be present. Do not rely on these devices as your sole means of detection, since you could be working in a high concentration for a long time before you become aware of the warning displayed in the indicator window. Colorimetric tube instruments are used to measure hydrogen sulfide concentrations. They are used to determine approximate airborne concentrations once the presence of hydrogen sulfide is suspected. Colorimetric tubes indicate the concentration of hydrogen sulfide by changing color in proportion to the amount of H2S present. The color change appears as a brownish stain along the body of the tube. The length of stain is compared to a scale on the side of the tube to determine the concentration. Electronic gas detectors are designed to warn workers of the presence of hydrogen sulfide by automatically sounding an alarm. There are many different models of electronic hydrogen sulfide detectors available. However, they can be divided up into two basic types: portable units and fixed units. Portable units are devices that are intended to provide warning of potentially hazardous concentrations of H2S in areas where fixed units are not available or do not provide adequate coverage. These are usually worn on the body of the worker, and they sound an alarm at a predetermined concentration, most often 10 parts per million. When the alarm sounds, the worker knows to either don their SCBA or leave the area immediately. Fixed units are often referred to as H2S monitors, since they are designed to give warning of the presence of H2S in a particular area on an around-the-clock basis. This warning allows personnel to take action to protect themselves. These units consist of a controller, semiconductor-based remote sensors, and remote alarms, which include lights and sirens. The controller interprets signals sent by the sensor array and activates the alarms at predetermined concentrations. Sensors are usually located in areas where there is a high potential for a release, areas where H2S is likely to accumulate, and in areas where workers are frequently present. Depending upon the nature of the facility, the number of sensors needed to effectively monitor a location may range from just a handful to hundreds. The remote alarms activated by the controller usually consist of lights and sirens. These are located near potentially hazardous areas and in areas where people are frequently present. The arrangement of light and siren sets and their associated alarm points varies somewhat from location to location. The arrangement on a particular location is primarily determined by the regulatory standards that govern the facility. Since the light and siren sets and their associated alarm points do vary, it is very important to attend a site-specific safety orientation which provides an overview of the contingency plan prior to working on an H2S location. The site-specific orientation will include the location and use of protective breathing equipment, portable fire extinguishers, other emergency alarm systems, emergency exit locations, and designated protection centers or muster points, and current prevailing wind direction. Both portable and fixed electronic hydrogen sulfide detectors must be properly maintained in order to assure accurate readings. It is very important that these instruments be regularly calibrated according to the manufacturer's specifications and regulatory requirements. Although equipment such as respirators and gas detectors greatly reduce the potential for exposure to H2S, they are only effective when used with safe work practices. Safe work practices are documented, standardized procedures that are developed so that potentially hazardous tasks can be performed safely. There are many precautions concerning hydrogen sulfide operations that apply no matter which industry you work in. Anytime workers are in a potentially hazardous area, the buddy system should be used. The buddy system involves assigning someone to watch over any worker who must enter an area where toxic gas is potentially present. In the event of an emergency, the buddy can immediately summon help. Another safety precaution is to always work upwind of areas or equipment where H2S may be released. Since H2S tends to move with the wind, an upwind location is where there is the least potential for exposure. Anyone who works at an H2S facility should constantly be aware of the wind direction. This is greatly facilitated by flags and windsocks placed in highly visible locations. It is also a good idea to take precautions to avoid creating a spark in areas where H2S is present. The very low auto-ignition temperature and wide flammable range of H2S means it is very easily ignited. Electrical equipment should be either intrinsically safe or explosion-proof. In areas where atmospheric concentrations of H2S are known to be greater than 10% of the lower explosive limit, hand tools should also be made of non-sparking materials, such as brass or copper beryllium alloy. If effective use is made of contingency plans, engineering controls, personal protective equipment, gas detection equipment, and safe work practices, workers should not be exposed to harmful concentrations of hydrogen sulfide. However, failure to make effective use of these measures can have disastrous results. In order to have the best chance of a successful rescue, an emergency plan must be in place. The emergency plan should assure that an adequate number of 30-minute work rescue self-contained breathing apparatus are available, emergency response training is conducted, the buddy system is used, and provisions have been made for emergency medical care. A well-thought-out emergency response plan is necessary because an improperly executed rescue attempt is most often fatal to the rescuer. Before attempting a rescue, sound the alarm so that other workers are aware of the situation. Once this is done, protect yourself before approaching the victim by donning a 30-minute work rescue self-contained breathing apparatus. Remove the victim to fresh air as soon as possible and begin artificial respiration. Artificial respiration may be provided by mouth or by oxygen resuscitator. If an oxygen resuscitator is readily available, this is the preferred method, since it reduces the potential for exposure to blood-borne pathogens and delivers 100% oxygen to the victim. Special training is required to use an oxygen resuscitator. If no pulse is detected after artificial respiration is initiated, CPR must be administered immediately. Never perform chest compressions if the victim has a pulse. If you begin artificial respiration within 3 minutes after the victim is overcome, they should have a pulse, and the chances are very good they will fully recover from the exposure. The longer the rescue takes, the greater the chances the victim will suffer permanent brain damage or death. When a victim of H2S poisoning regains consciousness, they are likely to be very nauseous. It may be necessary to assist them in maintaining their airway free of vomit. Anyone who loses consciousness or experiences prolonged irritation as a result of H2S should be evaluated by a physician in order to detect and treat any delayed health problems such as pulmonary edema. Hydrogen sulfide is a very serious hazard which requires rigorous training, periodic drills, pre-planning, and special work precautions. If you use the information presented in this program and carefully follow your company's safety requirements, you can help prevent the associated hazards of H2S and enjoy a long, safe career in the oil, gas, and petrochemical industries.